I have been waiting for you. Pull close to the fire and listen to a tale of true darkness.
The first time I understood how badly we were losing, it was not because the fire crowned through the pines like a freight train, or because the sky turned the colour of a bruise at noon. It was because a woman in a minivan rolled down her window at the edge of our roadblock, coughed into her sleeve, and asked me, politely, like she was at a grocery store customer service desk, whether the evacuation route was still the same, even though the back seat was full of people sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead with ash on their eyelashes like powdered sugar. I was standing on the shoulder of California State Route 44 outside Redding in a yellow fire-resistant shirt that smelled like smoke and sweat and last night's instant coffee. My name is Nate Callahan. I was a wildland firefighter, the kind who lived out of a red bag for weeks at a time, ate meals under a canopy of headlamps, and could fall asleep to the sound of chainsaws and diesel engines like it was rain. We had been chasing the Mule Ridge fire for 3 days. It started the way so many did. A hot afternoon, a dry wind, and one small ignition in the wrong place. By the time it made the news, it was already a monster that threw embers across roads and did not care what you named it. The incident command system, the structure we used to run large emergencies, had already spun up to a full machine. That meant there was an incident commander calling the shots, operations staff directing the work, planning staff tracking what might happen next, logistics staff feeding and fueling us, and a finance staff keeping the paperwork from becoming a second disaster. It meant we had divisions and branches on the map, engines staged at intersections, bulldozers cutting fireline, aircraft dropping water and fire retardant when the smoke allowed, and a base camp that looked like a temporary city. It also meant, like always, that civilians were trying to drive through a place they did not understand. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice calm, "you learn early that panic spreads faster than flame. You need to turn around. Evacuation is toward Interstate 5. Follow the signs and the deputies." She blinked at me, eyes glassy. "But the radio said the shelter is at the fairgrounds." "The fairgrounds is full," I told her. "They're moving people to Anderson and farther south." She nodded like that made sense. Then she did something that still wakes me up sometimes. She smiled, small and blank, and her hand drifted off the steering wheel for a second, as if she forgot what it was for. In the back seat, a teenage boy's head tilted, his mouth opened, not to talk, not to breathe deeper. It was like his jaw had been unlatched. I saw the woman's eyes flick toward him in the mirror, but she did not turn around. She did not react. On the far side of the minivan, smoke rolled low along the asphalt, and behind that smoke the forest burned. I leaned closer to the window. "Is everyone okay in there?" The woman stared straight ahead. "He got sick," she said. "Everyone is getting sick. It's from the smoke." Smoke sickness is real. Heat exhaustion is real. Dehydration is real. People get confused in disasters because the body is a fragile machine and fear does the rest. I'd seen drivers who could not remember their own address. I'd seen folks who tried to go back for a pet or a photo album when flames were already spotting into their backyard. But this was different. This was too quiet. "Mom, do you have water?" I asked. She nodded once. "We do." A deputy sheriff's cruiser rolled up behind her, lights flashing through the haze. The deputy stepped out, hand raised, walking toward us with that tired, clipped posture everyone wore after the first sleepless night. I held up my palm to him, a signal we used all the time. "Wait, just a second." I watched the boy in the back seat. His eyes were open, but they did not track. His pupils looked wrong, too wide, like he'd been staring at the sun, and then walked into a dark room. The woman coughed again, wet and deep, and the sound made my skin prickle. "Ma'am," I said slower, "I need you to pull forward into that turnout, right now." She did not move. The boy's fingers began tapping the window with a soft, rhythmic sound. Tap, 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 like a code. The deputy was beside me now. "What's going on?" "I don't know," I said, and my mouth felt dry. "But something's not right." The woman's head turned toward me in a motion that was too sharp for someone that tired. Her eyes locked on mine, not confused, not scared. Hungry. The deputy took a step back without meaning to. I saw it in his shoulders. "Mom," he said, firmer now. "Put the vehicle in park." The woman smiled again. The boy in the back seat stopped tapping. Then, in one sudden motion, the woman shoved the door open hard enough that it almost hit my knee. She climbed out like she was stepping onto a curb. She did not look at the deputy's badge or the flashing lights. She looked past us, down the road, toward the line of evacuees and engines and dust. She moved toward it. "Hey!" the deputy shouted. I grabbed the woman's elbow by instinct, something to stop her, to anchor her in reality. Her skin was hot, like she had a fever, and when she turned, her face was inches from mine, and her breath smelled like something spoiled. I let go so fast I almost fell back. She took one step toward me. Behind her, the boy's door opened. The deputy reached for his radio, thumb mashing the push-to-talk button. "Dispatch, I need medical." The woman lunged. Not like a scared person or an angry person, like an animal that had decided. The deputy stumbled back. I saw his hand go to his holster and then hesitate. Deputies are trained for a lot of things. They are not trained for a woman in sweatpants and ash-covered hair, trying to climb over them with her teeth bared. I shoved a traffic cone between us without thinking. It bounced off her thigh. She did not react. The boy was out now, standing behind her, swaying. The deputy shouted again, and for a second I thought the noise would snap them out of it. It didn't. The woman's mouth opened. Her jaw worked. She made a sound that was not a word. And the boy echoed it, like a call and response. I backed up, hands out, heart hammering. "Mom, stop. Please stop." The deputy raised his baton instead of his firearm. That told me how uncertain he was, how quickly his mind was trying to find a box that fit this problem. The woman slapped at the baton with her forearm and kept coming. The deputy retreated toward his cruiser. I saw his eyes, wide, looking for a plan that did not exist. Down the line, another firefighter saw what was happening and started jogging toward us. Behind him, a couple of evacuees turned their heads. The woman broke into a run. The deputy yanked his car door open and slipped inside, locking it by muscle memory. The woman hit the window with her palm, then with her forehead, then with her palm again. She was not trying to break it like a person. She was testing it like a predator tests a fence. The boy came up behind her and did the same. The firefighter jogging toward us slowed, then stopped, like his brain refused the picture. "Call medical," the deputy said through the cracked window. "Call everyone." I already had my radio up. "Base, this is Division Charlie on 44, I said. "We have a civilian medical emergency and possible violent behavior at the roadblock. Need law enforcement and medical response. Advise." My voice sounded normal in my ears, and I hated that. It made it feel like something routine. Then, a second minivan rolled up in the smoke behind the first, and a third behind that, and a sedan, and a pickup. And the line of evacuees became a line of potential problems. The woman turned her head toward the next vehicle, like she'd heard dinner being served. That was the first time I understood we were dealing with two disasters at once. And one of them didn't care about fire breaks. We ended that roadblock fast, not because we had a clean plan, but because everyone's instincts finally synchronized. The deputy, trapped in his cruiser with two people pounding on the glass, hit his siren again and again. Engines idled. Someone shouted for people to stay in their cars. I grabbed a length of barrier tape and waved the incoming vehicles to turn around, pointing them back the way they came, toward neighborhoods that were already threatened by smoke and embers. The firefighter who jogged toward us, his name was Luis, a sawyer from a hand crew out of Chico, stopped beside me, breathing hard. "What is that?" he asked, staring at the woman. "I don't know," I said, "but do not get close." We were trained to help, to grab arms, to do basic first aid, to put bodies where they needed to be. The thing in front of us made that training feel useless. The woman struck the cruiser window again, then suddenly stepped away and looked down the road, as if something more interesting had called her. A man in the second minivan leaned out his window, shouting, "What's going on? My kid is in the back." The woman snapped her head toward him. The man stopped talking mid-sentence. The woman began moving toward his door. Luis cursed under his breath, one sharp syllable, and sprinted forward, grabbing a road sign stand and swinging it out like a barrier. He didn't hit her, not really. He put it between her and the minivan, pushing her back. She slammed into it, hands scrabbling. She wasn't strong in a normal way. She was relentless. The boy came in behind her, colliding with her back, both of them pressing into the metal like a tide. The man in the minivan yanked his window up, panic finally arriving on his face. A deputy from farther down the road ran up, and another behind him. They shouted. They tried to herd. They tried to do what you do with people. But the woman and the boy were not acting like people. Then one of the deputies noticed something and froze. At the edge of the smoke, in the ditch beside the road, a figure was standing up, slow, unsteady. Then another. Then another. They were coming out of the trees like the forest itself was walking toward us. The wildfire was throwing smoke so thick it made the world smaller. That smoke was now a curtain, and behind it, something had been moving. We fell back as one without saying it. The deputies retreated to their cars. Luis grabbed my sleeve and pulled me. We ran for the engines, for the anchor points we knew. The evacuees saw the movement now too. Doors locked, tires squealed. A car tried to make a three-point turn and nearly clipped a ditch. Over the radio, a voice crackled with that harsh, metallic urgency that comes when someone is trying to keep it together. "Multiple reports of violent subjects at the fairgrounds shelter," someone said. "Repeat, violent subjects. Medical cannot access. Law enforcement requesting additional units." A second voice overlapped. "We have a structure protection group reporting bites." The word bites hit my brain like a rock. I did not want to attach meaning to it. I did anyway. "Base," I said, pushing my radio button again. "This is Callahan. I'm seeing multiple civilians moving out of the ditch line. They look disoriented and aggressive. We need guidance. Are we dealing with a chemical exposure? Smoke inhalation?" There was a pause long enough that I could hear the wind and the sirens and the pounding on windows. Then the reply came, and the voice on the other end was not calm. It was trying to be. "Division Charlie, negative on chemical exposure. Reports are coming in from multiple locations. Stand by. Maintain distance. Do not engage. Priority is life safety. Repeat, priority is life safety. Do not engage." It was a phrase that should have been obvious. It was also a phrase that proved nobody understood what engage meant anymore. We fell back to fire camp at Whiskeytown Lake by mid-afternoon, not because the fire pushed us, though it was still pushing, but because command decided we were losing control of the human side of the incident. The camp, which had been a grid of sleeping tents, portable showers, dining canopies and trucks, was now ringed with deputies and National Guard trucks that had appeared like they'd been hiding behind the trees. People were talking in clusters, firefighters, medics, logistics folks. Everyone had heard something. Everyone had seen a clip on someone's phone. Everyone had a theory that tried to make it normal. Tainted water, heat stroke, smoke poisoning, a new drug, an airborne illness. The word infected started spreading through the camp the way embers spread across dry grass. I tried to focus on what I could control: gear, water, my crew's accountability, checking that everyone had eaten something. You can fall apart faster than you think when adrenaline carries you through a morning and then drops you at noon. Luis found me at the edge of the supply trailer. his hard hat tucked under his arm. "You saw the ditch line, right?" he asked. "Tell me you saw that." "I saw it," I said. He rubbed his face with his palm, leaving a streak of ash across his cheek. "We don't have a playbook for that." "No," I said, "we don't." I spotted someone walking toward us with the crisp, purposeful stride of a person who still believed plans mattered. Her hair was tied back. Her face was smudged with smoke, but her eyes were bright and steady. She wore scrubs under a borrowed fire jacket and carried a medical bag that looked like it had been yanked out of an ambulance. "Who's in charge of Division Charlie?" she asked. Louise pointed at me. "Him." She stepped closer. "I'm Dr. Maya Singh. County Hospital sent me with the medical task force. They're overwhelmed. The shelters are turning into chaos." "Dr. Singh," I said. "Nate Callahan." She looked past me toward the camp. "How many people have you seen like that? Confused, aggressive, not responding?" "At the roadblock, too. Then," I nodded toward the direction of the ditch line. "More coming out of the smoke." She exhaled slowly through her nose. "Okay, I need you to listen carefully. This is not smoke inhalation. This is not heat stroke. Those can make someone confused or angry. They do not make someone bite. They do not make someone ignore pain." The word bite again. Louis shifted his weight. "Are you sure?" "I've treated 3 patients with the same pattern," she said. "Fever, confusion, then sudden agitation. Then they become driven, like there's nothing left but a single impulse." "What's causing it?" I asked. Her eyes flicked down for half a second, just enough to tell me she didn't like the answer. "We don't know," she said, "but it's spreading. It may be from bodily fluids. It may be from contact. It may be from something airborne we haven't identified." I thought about the woman's breath, the smell, the heat of her skin. A loudspeaker crackled to life over the camp. "Attention all personnel," an amplified voice said. "This is an official emergency message. Effective immediately, this incident is transitioning. Follow law enforcement instructions. Do not approach any aggressive civilians. Maintain team integrity. Remain in your assigned groups. Further instructions to follow." Then, as if the world wanted to make sure we understood the theme of the day, the wind shifted hard. Smoke rolled across camp in a thick wave. The sky dimmed. Ash fell like grey snow. And somewhere beyond the trees, the fire found a new ridge. Forests burn. And apparently, the dead keep walking. By dusk, the camp was no longer a camp. It was a holding area for people who did not know where to go. The fire had jumped the ridge north of Whiskeytown, threatening the access road. Evacuation routes were clogged. The county dispatch system was overloaded. Cell service was fading under heavy use and damaged infrastructure. The hospital was beyond capacity. And the shelters, every place you'd normally tell families to go, were reporting incidents. That was the word they used, incidents, like it was a spilled drink. I found myself sitting on the tailgate of an engine, helmet in my hands, listening to the radio chatter stack on itself like tangled rope. "Unit 12, do you copy? We have an aggressive subject at the south gate. Medical to staging. We need additional restraint equipment. Negative, we cannot enter that building. We have multiple down. Repeat, do not." It wasn't just one location. It was Anderson. It was Red Bluff. It was Cottonwood. It was little outlying communities where a single deputy might be the only law enforcement presence for miles. It was the kind of spread you see when something is already ahead of you. Maya sat beside me without asking. She had that exhausted posture of someone who'd been sprinting on the inside for hours. "I found out something," she said quietly. Luis was nearby, leaning against a tool cache, pretending he wasn't listening. He was. "What?" I asked. She looked at the dirt, choosing her words. "The county lab ran blood work on one of the first patients. There's a pattern, A viral load that spikes fast. White blood cells crash. Neurological markers go sideways. You're saying it's a virus, I said. I'm saying it acts like one, she replied. And there's something else. The patients who progress, their heart rate's slow. Their breathing becomes shallow, but they keep moving. They keep trying. I stared into the smoky twilight. That doesn't make sense. No, she agreed. It doesn't, but it's happening. Luis pushed off the cash and came over, unable to help himself. So what do? Maya glanced at him. We treat it like a contamination hazard until we know otherwise. No contact, no bodily fluids, eye protection, gloves, face covering if you have it. The phrase face covering in a fire camp was almost funny. We had bandanas and smoke masks for particulates, but not medical grade gear. We've got respiratory masks for ash, I said. Not for this. It's better than nothing, she said. A shout rose from the south end of camp. A sharp, sudden sound that made every head turn. Then another. Then the sound of engines starting in a hurry. I stood, helmet still in my hands. A line of deputies was moving toward the perimeter, where the trees met the camp's portable light towers. Their flashlights jittered in the haze. Behind them, National Guard soldiers were forming a loose line, trying to look like a barrier without actually becoming one. What now? Luis muttered. We didn't have to wait long to see. A figure stepped into the light, then another, then several more. They came out of the smoke with the same slow persistence as the ones on the ditch line. They were not charred or cinematic. They were ordinary people. Jeans, hoodies, sneakers, faces blank, eyes wrong. One of them wore a bright yellow evacuation tag around his wrist like a hospital band. He walked toward the deputies and did not slow when the deputies shouted. The first deputy raised his baton. The second raised his firearm but kept it pointed down, finger off the trigger, posture full of hesitation. Stop, someone shouted. Stop right there. The man didn't stop. He drifted closer, and then he suddenly accelerated with that same predatory certainty I'd seen at the roadblock. The line flinched. Someone fired a warning shot hole into the dirt. The sound cracked through camp like a whip. For a half second, everything froze. The infected man didn't even blink. Then he kept coming. And behind him, more bodies stepped into the light. Panic is not a dramatic scream. Panic is 1,000 tiny decisions made badly at the same time. A deputy fired again, closer. A soldier shouted. A firefighter grabbed his own radio, trying to call someone who was already being called by the 10 others. And then the camp began to move. People grabbed duffels, helmets, medical kits, chainsaw packs. Engines rolled, trucks backed and turned. Someone fell, someone cursed, someone cried out for a partner. I had been through chaotic evacuations before, but those had direction. Those had known threats. This was a wildfire on one side and an unknown, spreading human hazard on the other. I looked at Maya. We can't stay here. Her jaw clenched. No. Luis nodded hard. Where do we go? The fire map in my head lit up. Whiskey Town, Shasta Lake, the old lookout towers, the dam infrastructure, places with access control, hard barriers, water. Shasta Dam, I said, surprised at how certain it sounded. The power plant and the maintenance yards, fences, gates, concrete, water, if the roads are still open. Maya's eyes narrowed, calculating. It will be crowded. Everything will be crowded, I said. A camp supervisor's voice blared again over the loudspeaker, frantic now. All personnel, evacuate to your vehicles. Follow law enforcement directions. Maintain group accountability. Do not. The message cut out in static. A scream rose from the perimeter. Then a second scream. And then the generators hiccuped and half the light towers flickered. Luis grabbed my arm. Now, he said. We ran. We did not leave in a heroic convoy. We left in a messy, smoke-choked line of vehicles trying to fit through a bottleneck gate, while the world behind us unraveled. I drove an engine because it was what I had keys for, and because an engine is a moving toolbox with a water tank, a pump, and radios that can talk to more than a cell phone can. Luis rode shotgun, chainsaw bar cover in his lap like it was a comfort object. Maya sat behind us, braced with one hand on the seat and the other gripping her medical bag. The road out was clogged with other apparatus and civilian cars that had slipped into camp looking for help and now found themselves leaving with us. Smoke reduced visibility to a few hundred feet at best. Headlights made it worse, reflecting back and turning the world into a tunnel of grey. At an intersection, a deputy waved us through with one arm and pointed the opposite direction with the other, like a man trying to direct a flood. We crossed through downtown Reading in a haze that made the familiar landmarks feel like props in a disaster movie. Traffic lights flashed red, storefronts were dark, the air was thick enough that it tasted like pennies. On a sidewalk near a closed gas station, 3 people stood together, swaying. They watched the vehicles pass with that same blank intensity. Luis saw them and muttered, "No." Maya leaned forward between the seats. "Keep driving," she said. "I am," I replied, knuckles tight on the wheel. We hit Interstate 5 southbound, then took a connector east toward the dam roads. Every route I considered had 2 questions now. Is it passable from fire? And is it passable from people? We passed a line of cars pulled onto the shoulder, doors open, hazards flashing. A man ran in circles in the median, waving his arms, shouting at nothing. Then we saw an ambulance abandoned at an on-ramp, rear doors open, gurney half out, bloodless but terrifying in its emptiness. The driver's seat was empty, the cab door hung open like a mouth. Maya stared at it and said nothing. Her silence was heavier than words. At 9:17 p.m, my dash clock was still working. We reached the Shasta Dam access road and found the first real obstacle. A gate down, roadblock set up with concrete barriers and vehicles. A mix of law enforcement and armed security. A man in a reflective vest approached, flashlight held low. His face was tight. "Who are you with?" "State Fire," I said, leaning out. "We're evacuating from Whiskeytown Base. We have medical personnel with us." His flashlight hit Maya's face in the back seat. He hesitated, then nodded sharply. "You're not the only ones. They're letting emergency in. But listen, no one goes past the first yard without screening." "Screening," Luis echoed. The man's jaw worked. "If they're bit, if they're sick, if they're acting wrong, they're not coming in. I don't care who they are." The word bit again. It was everywhere now, like a drumbeat. We rolled forward through the gate into a lit maintenance yard that felt like a different planet compared to the burning forest behind us. Sodium lights cast harsh shadows. Concrete walls rose. Chain-link fences topped with barbed wire cut the space into controlled zones. People were everywhere. Trucks, utility crews, security staff, families sitting on the ground with blankets, workers from the power plant, a cluster of tired firefighters from another district, faces pale under soot. It was not safe, but it was contained. At the far end, a second fence line had a gate and a checkpoint. 2 nurses in vests and gloves were standing beside a table with bottled water, clipboards, and what looked like basic medical screening tools. A deputy stood near them, posture rigid. A sign had been taped to a barricade in thick marker. "If you have been bitten or scratched by an aggressive person, report immediately. If you are feverish, confused, Oregon having trouble breathing, report immediately. Do not hide symptoms." I read it twice and felt my stomach drop. Luis read it and said very softly, "It's real." Maya's voice was quiet but firm. "It's spreading enough that they made a sign." We parked the engine in a row of apparatus and climbed out. The yard smelled like diesel, concrete, and fear. Not smoke, not here. That alone made the place feel like a trap. The wildfire had been terrible, but at least it was honest. It didn't pretend to be normal. A man approached us, mid-40s, hard hat, reflective vest, clipboard in hand. He had the look of someone who had spent years in infrastructure, practical, blunt, awake in emergencies. "I'm Carl Bennett," he said, "facilities maintenance supervisor. I'm coordinating staging and resource allocation for the yard. If you're fire, I can put you with the emergency response group." "Callahan," I said. "This is Luis and Dr. Singh." Carl's eyes flicked to Maya with obvious relief. "Good. We need medical help. People are coming in from all over." Maya nodded once. "Where are you keeping anyone symptomatic?" Carl's mouth tightened. "We have an isolation bay set up in a storage building. Not perfect, but it's something." Luis lifted his chin toward the fences. "How's security holding?" Carl's gaze went to the far gate. "So far, okay. But the problem isn't just outside." He lowered his voice. "Some people got in before we understood what we were looking for. We're trying to screen, but you know how people are. They hide things when they're scared." Maya's expression hardened. "That's how it gets inside." Carl nodded grimly. "I know." A distant shout echoed from near the outer gate. Heads turned. A wave of tension rippled through the yard. I felt the familiar pull to move toward the problem, to be useful, to fix. But this wasn't a hose line or a dozer line. This was human. Carl saw the look in my eyes and pointed toward a cluster of shipping containers stacked too high along a wall. "If you want to help," he said, "we're reinforcing perimeter points and setting up lighting. We also need a place for responders to rest that isn't mixed with the general crowd." "A responder pocket," I said automatically. "We did that on incidents all the time." "Exactly," Carl replied. "And if you've got an engine, I can use your onboard lights and water." I looked at Luis. He nodded. Maya nodded too. So we did what we always did when the world made no sense. We built structure in the chaos. We set up a responder area behind a second fence line, using cones, barrier tape, and the physical presence of vehicles to create a controlled corridor. We rigged portable lights. We positioned the engine so its scene lights could wash the container wall in bright white. We laid out a simple rule: one entrance, one exit, accountability board, no wandering. Maya went to the isolation building with Carl to check the setup and the patients. Luis and I worked with a pair of utility workers to reinforce a weak section of fence near a drainage channel. The channel ran under the yard through a concrete culvert that disappeared toward the riverside of the dam. "It's a path," Luis said, shining his flashlight into the culvert opening. "A path is a problem." "Everything is a problem," I muttered. We dragged metal grating and heavy pallets, secured them with chain and padlocks, and added warning tape. It wasn't perfect, but it was a barrier that would slow anything coming through. Carl came back from the isolation building with Maya at his side. Maya's face was set. "6 patients," she said quietly when she reached us. 2 have fevers and confusion. 1 was scratched. 3 are in early agitation." My throat tightened. Early agitation. "It progresses fast in some," she said. "We need more separation, more staff, and we need people to stop lying." Carl rubbed his temple. "We're doing what we can." A loudspeaker mounted on a light pole crackled to life, and a security voice spoke in clipped, controlled tones. "Attention, the outer gate is temporarily closed. If you are outside, remain calm. If you are inside, remain inside. Do not crowd the fences." The yard erupted in murmurs. Luis said, "Outer gate closed means something is out there." Carl didn't answer. His jaw was locked. Maya looked at me. "Nate," she said, voice low. "If one of those patients turns, we need a plan that doesn't involve close contact." I understood what she was saying. Keep distance, barriers, containment. And behind her words was the realization that medicine might not help. "I'll talk to Carl," I said. Carl heard his name and looked at me. "Say it." We need a contingency for isolation breach, I said. If someone becomes aggressive, we need a way to secure that building without people going hands-on. Carl's eyes flicked toward the isolation building. There's a roll-up door and a man door. We can lock it, we can block it. But if people are inside, Maya's voice cut in. Then we keep the rest of the yard from becoming the same problem. No one liked the sentence, but it was the only honest one. A wind gust swept through the yard and carried the faint smell of smoke even here. The wildfire was still out there, chewing through timber and brush, turning the world into fuel. The dead, or the infected, or whatever they were out there too, drawn by noise, lights and movement. Two disasters converging, and we were standing in the middle, trying to make concrete and chain link feel like safety. Around 1:30 a.m., the yard's uneasy rhythm shifted. It started with a scream from the isolation building. It was not a long scream. It was a short, sharp sound that cut off too quickly. Then came pounding, heavy, repeated impacts against metal. Maya was already moving before anyone else reacted. She ran across the yard toward the building, with her medical bag swinging and her shoulders tight. I went with her because I didn't know how to do anything else. Louise followed, grabbing a long-handled tool from a nearby rack, not as a weapon, but as a distance maker, a way to keep something away. Carl sprinted too, shouting into his radio for security. We reached the isolation building to find chaos at the door. Two security guards were trying to keep the man door closed, while someone inside pushed against it. The roll-up door shuddered as something struck it from the inside. A nurse stood back crying, hands held up and shaking, gloves smeared with something dark that I refused to label. Maya grabbed the nurse's shoulders. "Talk to me," she demanded, voice sharp. "What happened?" The nurse's eyes were wild. He was fine. He was just tired, and then he grabbed the other man." A thud against the roll-up door made everyone flinch. Maya's face went pale. "How many are still inside?" "4, the nurse sobbed. 4 and... The man door jolted outward, and the guards strained, boots sliding on concrete. A hand appeared in the gap, fingers clawing for purchase, then withdrew as the door slammed. Carl's radio crackled. "Security to isolation. Do you copy? We're on our way." Carl grabbed a nearby forklift keyring off a hook and ran to a forklift parked beside the building. He started it with shaking hands. "What are you doing?" I shouted over the engine noise. "Blocking the door," he yelled back. "If it gets out, it's in the yard." Maya spun toward him. "If you block it, you trap people inside." Carl's face contorted. "If it gets out, it traps everyone." The pounding intensified. The roll-up door shuddered again, and I saw the bottom edge bow slightly. Louise stepped close to me and said through clenched teeth, "That door isn't built for this." Maya looked at me, eyes fierce. "Nate, we need to pull the uninfected out if we can." "How?" I asked, and hated how small the word sounded. Her gaze snapped to the nurse. "Is there another exit?" The nurse shook her head, sobbing. Maya swore, a rare, quiet word, and then forced herself back into control. "Okay, we do this the safest way possible. We open the man door just enough to pull anyone out. If we see aggressive movement, we shut it." Carl drove the forklift forward, positioning the forks in front of the roll-up door without touching it yet, ready to pin it if it blew outward. Security arrived in a rush, flashlights bouncing, radios barking. One guard shouted, "We need to lock it down." Maya stepped into his path. "There are still people inside who may not be infected," she said, voice like a blade. "We try to extract. Now." The guard hesitated. He looked at the door, at the shaking metal, at the fear in the nurse's face. Then he nodded once, sharply. 2 seconds, he said. "That's all." I moved to the man door with 2 guards. Louise stood back with the long-handled tool, ready to push something away without touching it. "On 3, one guard said. My heart hammered so hard it made the world pulse. 1, he said. 2. 3. He cracked the door. A hand shot out, grabbing the edge. A human hand, trembling. "Help!" a woman's voice gasped. We grabbed her forearms, not skin if we could avoid it, mostly sleeves, and hauled her out, dragging her backward. She fell to the ground, sobbing, scrambling away. Behind her, a man surged toward the opening, with his head low and his mouth open, and the guard slammed the door shut just in time. The impact rattled the frame. The woman on the ground screamed, "My husband is in there! He's in there!" Maya dropped beside her. "Were you scratched? Were you bitten?" "No," the woman sobbed. "No, he pushed me out. He told me to run." The pounding returned, harder now, like the people inside had turned into a single force. Carl shouted over the forklift engine, "We're done. We have to seal it." Maya's face twisted with pain, but she nodded. "Seal it," she said softly, like it cost her something. Carl drove the forks into the roll-up door with controlled pressure, pinning it against the frame. Security dragged heavy pallets and steel drums to wedge against the man door. The building became a box. The sounds inside did not stop. They became louder. The woman on the ground sobbed until her breath hitched, and she could not make sound anymore. Maya stayed with her, checking her eyes, her skin, her pulse, looking for any sign. I stood there, staring at the vibrating metal, listening to the impacts, and my brain kept trying to fit it into a category it understood. Trapped animals, crowd crush, mechanical failure, but none of those were right. Louise stepped close and said, voice hoarse, "If it spreads inside this yard, we're finished." I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. Instead, I looked up at the night sky above the dam, and for the first time in my life, I hoped for rain with a desperation that felt like prayer. But all that fell was ash, carried on the wind from burning forests. Morning came grey and wrong. The sun rose behind smoke, turning into a pale disk that looked like it didn't belong. The yard was quieter, not because people were calmer, but because they were exhausted. Security had doubled the patrols. The outer gate remained closed. The radio chatter said the access roads were now being blocked not just by fire closures, but by aggressive groups near intersections. It sounded like the infected were gathering wherever people gathered. Maya barely slept. She set up a small triage area in the responder pocket and began training anyone willing to help on how to screen for symptoms: fever, confusion, agitation, unusual behavior. She told people to keep distance. She told them to stop thinking they could talk someone down. Carl ran on coffee and adrenaline, coordinating with power plant staff to keep the yard's generators fueled and the gates powered. Shasta Dam was still producing electricity, at least some, but the grid outside was unstable. There were reports of rolling outages, deliberate shutoffs, damaged lines. Luis and I did perimeter walks with security, checking fences, looking for weak points, reinforcing with whatever we could: stacked materials, locked gates, vehicles positioned as obstacles. At 10:40 a.m., a convoy arrived from the north. It wasn't a neat convoy. It was a cluster of vehicles pushed together by fear. A school bus, 2 pickup trucks, a county utility van, and a small fire engine from a rural department. They stopped at the outer gate, and a guard's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "Remain in your vehicles, windows up, await instructions." The bus doors stayed closed, faces pressed against glass. Carl and I went to the gate with Maya trailing behind, her face tight. A deputy at the checkpoint spoke to us without looking away from the vehicles. "They say they've got kids," he said. "They also say someone on that bus is sick." Maya's shoulders stiffened. "How sick?" The deputy's mouth tightened. "They won't say." That was the problem. Fear turned people into liars because they thought truth would get them killed. Sometimes it did. Carl raised a bullhorn. "This is a controlled site," he called, voice amplified and harsh. "We will let you in if you follow instructions. If anyone is symptomatic, you must tell us now." Hiding it will endanger everyone. A man leaned out of the utility van window, eyes bloodshot. We're not hiding anything, he shouted. We just need shelter. The town is gone. People were attacking. His voice broke. Maya stepped forward, raising her own voice without a bullhorn. Are any of you bitten or scratched by an aggressive person? Silence. Then, in the bus, a child began to cry. A woman inside the bus hammered on the glass and mouthed something I couldn't hear. Carl's face hardened. We can't let them all in without screening, he muttered. Luis, standing beside me, said quietly, if we turn them away, they'll try to force the gate. He was right. Desperation makes people do things they swear they would never do. Maya looked at the bus, and something in her expression changed. Pain, anger, determination. We set up a quarantine corridor outside the gate, she said. We screen one by one. We keep distance. We do it fast. Carl looked at the deputy. The deputy looked like a man trying to balance a scale with shaking hands. Do it, Carl said finally. We dragged cones and barrier tape and made a corridor in the gravel outside the gate, leading to a separate holding area. Security positioned vehicles to create funnel points. No one liked how it looked, like crowd control at a prison, but it was function. Maya stood at the front with gloves, face covering and eye protection. She kept her voice calm but firm, asking the same questions again and again. Fever, confusion, scratches, bites, any unusual behavior. People came out of vehicles in small groups, families, elderly couples, a teenage girl holding a cat carrier, a bus driver with trembling hands. They walked like they'd been awake for days. Most passed screening. Then a man stepped out of the school bus wearing a hoodie pulled up over his head despite the heat. He moved stiffly. Maya's eyes sharpened. Sir, she said, please lower your hood. The man didn't. Sir, she repeated, more forceful. His head turned toward her too fast, that same predatory snap. Luis shifted his stance, creating space. The man suddenly lunged toward Maya. Not running, not stumbling, lunging. A security guard reacted instantly, stepping between them with a shield-like posture, shoving the man back with a long pole used for crowd control. He didn't strike. He pushed, hard, keeping distance. The man hit the gravel and popped back up like he hadn't felt it. The bus erupted in screaming. Maya backed up, hands up, voice sharp. Close the corridor. Close it now. Security moved like a practiced unit now, because practice had begun in the last 24 hours. They swung vehicles and barriers, sealing the corridor's ends. The man in the hoodie slammed into the tape and cones like they were nothing, hands grabbing, mouth open. Another person in the bus stood up behind the glass and began pounding on the window. Then another. Then the bus driver started crying. Carl's face went white. How many are on that bus? 32, the deputy said, voice strained. Maya stared at the bus. If that one is infected, there may be more. The man in the hoodie threw himself at the makeshift barrier again and again. He was trapped between the corridor's ends, contained for the moment. But the bus, full of people, was behind him. A woman burst out of the bus's emergency exit window, climbing awkwardly, dropping to the gravel. She ran toward us, hands out. They're changing, she screamed. They're... She stumbled, then looked over her shoulder. A hand reached out of the emergency window behind her and grabbed her backpack strap, yanking her backward. She screamed, falling. The strap held. She clawed at the gravel. Maya moved forward, but Luis grabbed her arm. No, he said, voice harsh. No contact. The woman's scream cut off as she was pulled back toward the bus. Maya's face contorted with helpless fury. Carl turned away, squeezing his eyes shut for a split second like he could erase the scene. Then the bus doors burst open, and people poured out, not running away, not stumbling towards safety, moving in that same driven, hungry pattern. It was like watching a crowd at a stadium exit, except the crowd's purpose was wrong. Security shouted, cones scattered, the corridor became useless under the pressure of bodies. The outer gate behind us was still closed. The inner gate behind that was open. We had a choice: try to hold them outside or retreat inside and seal the yard. Carl grabbed his radio. "Seal the inner gate," he shouted. "Seal it now!" The deputy yelled for the same thing into his radio. Maya stared at the bus, at the people still inside who might not be infected, and I saw her take a step forward, like she might run into the chaos anyway. I stepped in front of her. "Maya," I said, voice low, urgent. "If you go in there, you can't help anyone." Her eyes flashed with something like hatred. At the situation, at me, at reality. Then she nodded once, sharply, as if cutting off a piece of herself. We retreated behind the inner gate as security slammed it shut and locked it. Vehicles repositioned, chains clanked, the yard became a fortress. Outside, the corridor dissolved into screams and banging and movement. Inside, we stood in silence, listening to the sounds of people pressed against chain link and steel. Luis breathed through his teeth. "They're drawn to crowds," he said. "Noise, light." Maya's voice was rough. "And smoke doesn't stop them." Carl stared at the gate as if he could will it to be stronger. "We can't keep doing this," he whispered. "We can't keep turning people away." But what he meant, and what we all heard, was, we can't keep letting this get inside. Outside the fence, the forest burned. And beyond that, the world was changing. By day 3, the dam yard was running like a small city-state. Carl and the infrastructure crew managed power, fuel, and water with ruthless efficiency. They rationed generator time. They assigned tasks. They put a schedule on the chaos, because schedules keep people from breaking. Maya trained volunteers to do symptom checks and basic care for dehydration, smoke irritation, and panic. She set up a system where anyone who felt off could report without immediate punishment. She worked hard to replace fear with honesty. Luis took over perimeter reinforcement with a mix of firefighters and utility workers, using the same instincts that build fireline: identify weak points, fortify, create redundancy. He had a way of talking to people that made them move, because he didn't pretend it was okay. He just made it doable. I found myself in the middle of everything, because my job had always been to operate in the space between plans and reality. I coordinated with security on lighting, noise discipline, and response drills. I helped Carl map out the yard's zones like it was an incident. Operations areas, shelter areas, isolation areas, staging. We still had radios, and radios told us the outside was collapsing fast. Reading's downtown had reports of aggressive groups blocking streets. The fairgrounds shelter had gone silent. Emergency dispatch was intermittent. Fire crews were being pulled from line because their own families were missing, because their engines were being stopped by desperate civilians, because the same infection was now in places far beyond the fire perimeter. The wildfire itself did not stop. It moved with the wind, chewing through drainages and ridges, throwing embers over roads that become evacuation routes and then had become traps. At night, the horizon glowed orange in multiple directions, and the smoke layer reflected it back down on us, making the world feel like it was inside a furnace. And on the fences, the infected gathered, not in a swarm like fiction, in small clusters, individuals, pairs, a dozen at a time. They pressed against the chain link, hands grabbing, mouths working, eyes fixed on light and movement. They did not get tired. They did not stop. We stopped using the word dead in conversation because it felt like a curse. We used infected because it implied there was a disease we might still understand. But every day, the evidence pushed against that hope. On the morning of day 4, Maya pulled me aside. "I need to show you something," she said. Her voice was flat, and that scared me more than panic would have. She led me to the isolation building, the one we'd sealed, It sat at the edge of the yard now, like a shameful monument. The roll-up door was still pinned with the forklift. The man door was blocked with barrels and pallets. Security kept distance. But the sounds inside had changed. They weren't pounding anymore, not constantly. They came in bursts. Maya crouched near a small vent opening high on the wall and shone a flashlight through. I climbed onto a crate beside her and looked. Inside, shadows moved. Then a face slid into view, pressed against the vent from the inside, eyes staring out. It was a man's face, but not in a way my brain wanted to accept. His skin was pale under grime. His lips were cracked. His eye was wide, tracking the light, not blinking. He opened his mouth and made that sound again. Half breath, half hunger. Maya turned off the flashlight and stepped back, swallowing hard. "There's no medicine for that," she said quietly. I stared at the building as if it might apologize. "What are we supposed to do?" I asked. Maya's eyes were wet, but her voice stayed controlled. "We keep it contained. We keep it out of the yard, and we stop pretending everyone can be saved." The sentence was a blade. In the distance, a siren wailed somewhere outside the fences, then cut off abruptly. Carl came jogging up, sweat on his forehead, hard hat askew. "We have a bigger problem," he said. Luis appeared behind him, face grim. "The fire is shifting," he said. "Wind's coming from the west. If it pushes hard, smoke will fill this yard, and embers could start spot fires inside the fence." Carl nodded sharply. "And the access road is blocked, not by trees, by people. Security tried to clear it with vehicles, but there are too many out there." Maya's shoulders rose and fell once, controlled breath. "So we're contained," she said. Carl's jaw clenched. "We're surrounded." I looked up toward the smoke-hazed sky, wind, fire, infected. A dam yard that had become a fortress and a trap. In wildland firefighting, you learn the concept of an anchor point. Something solid you build from so the fire doesn't get behind you. You also learn what happens when you lose your anchor. We had lost every anchor except concrete. I said the only thing that made sense. "Then we plan like we're here for a while." Luis nodded. "We harden, we ration, we keep watch." Carl looked relieved at the words, like they gave him something to grab. "I can keep power going if fuel holds," he said. "We have diesel storage, but not endless." Maya looked at me, eyes sharp. "And we need to keep people from breaking," she said, "because fear will do what the infected can't." She was right. The dead kept walking. But the living were the ones who made choices. And choices were going to decide whether this yard became a refuge or a grave. The first internal conflict came that night, as internal conflicts always do, over rules. A group of evacuees tried to force their way into the responder pocket because it had quieter space, more structure, and a sense of control. Security pushed back. Voices rose. Someone shoved. Someone shouted that the responders were hoarding supplies. Carl arrived with a megaphone and a face like stone. "This area is for emergency personnel," he said. "We are working to keep the entire yard safe. If you breach this zone, you endanger everyone." A man in a baseball cap shouted back, "My wife is sick. You're letting her die in that building." Maya stepped forward. "We are monitoring symptomatic patients," she said. "We are doing what we can." The man's eyes were wild. "You locked them in. You locked them in there like animals." The crowd murmured, anger spreading. I felt the danger shift. Fires are dangerous because they move through fuel. Crowds are dangerous because emotion is fuel. Luis stepped up beside me and said quietly, "We need to get ahead of this." Maya's voice rose, cutting through noise with the authority of someone who'd told families hard truths before. "We did not lock people away because we wanted to," she said. "We did it because those patients became aggressive and tried to harm others. If we had not contained it, this yard would already be overrun." Someone shouted, "That's not true." Maya pointed at the fence line where infected figures pressed in the shadows. silhouettes against the yard lights. "That is true," she said, voice hard. "Look." The crowd turned. Some people flinched away. Some stared. Some whispered prayers. A few looked like they wanted to deny what their eyes were showing them. Carl raised the megaphone again. "We will hold a briefing every morning and every evening," he said. "We will share information. We will share assignments. We will not allow rumors to destroy this place." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across faces. "And if you try to force access to restricted zones," he continued, "you will be removed from the yard." A gasp rose. People looked at each other. Where would they go? Into the fire? Into the infected? Carl's voice softened just a fraction. "We're all scared," he said. "But fear doesn't get to drive." It was the closest thing to a speech I'd heard in years that didn't feel empty. The crowd slowly dispersed, tension easing but not disappearing. Luis exhaled through his nose. "That's going to get worse," he said. Maya looked exhausted. "Everything is going to get worse," she replied. At 2:12 a.m., the fire arrived in a new way. Not as flame at the fence, as embers. The wind pushed ash and burning debris across the yard like glowing insects. Small orange points landed on dry cardboard, on discarded paper, on the edges of pallets. We went into firefighting mode instinctively, but it was a different kind of firefighting now. One where we had to keep noise and movement controlled because noise and movement drew infected to the fence lines, and infected at the fence lines put pressure on our barriers. We used water sparingly. We stamped out embers. We cleared debris. We repositioned vehicles to reduce exposure to wind-blown sparks. We worked in teams, always watching the perimeter. At 3:40 a.m., a spot fire flared near the container wall, licking at a stack of wooden pallets. Luis and I hit it with a charged hose line from the engine's tank. Short bursts controlled. Water hissed. Smoke rose. The infected at the nearest fence line surged, drawn by sound and light. Hands grabbed chain link. Mouths opened. A security guard shone his flashlight too long, and the infected slammed against the fence harder, rattling it. "Lights down!" Carl shouted from across the yard. "Keep it down!" We extinguished the spot fire quickly, but my heart kept pounding as if the danger had only grown. Because it had. The wildfire was now close enough to rain embers into our refuge. And outside the fences, the infected were multiplying. We were a bright, noisy island. And islands draw swimmers, even the wrong kind. By day 6, we faced the problem that every fortress eventually faces: resources. Diesel was dropping faster than Carl wanted to admit, not because we were wasting it, but because power demanded fuel and fuel demanded power. Gates, lights, pumps, radios, refrigeration for medical supplies, basic functions. Water was stable for now because we had access to infrastructure, but distribution was a constant job. Food was becoming a different kind of ration. The yard had stock for workers, not for hundreds of evacuees. We had some supplies delivered early, but deliveries had stopped when roads became unsafe. On the radio, we heard fragments. National Guard units being redirected, regional command centers overwhelmed, hospitals failing, evacuation routes collapsing. It sounded like a slow failure that was becoming a fast one. Carl gathered us, me, Luis, Maya, and a couple of security supervisors, in a small maintenance office with a map pinned to the wall. "We have to consider relocation," he said bluntly. "Not today, not tomorrow, but soon." "Where?" I asked. Carl pointed at the map. "There are auxiliary facilities on the far side of the lake, smaller yards, less accessible, which is good. There's also a wilderness fire lookout area with a helicopter pad nearby, but aircraft aren't reliable now." Luis frowned. "Moving people through open roads is a disaster." Maya crossed her arms. "Also, moving sick people spreads infection." Carl nodded grimly. "Which is why I'm not saying we move everyone. I'm saying we establish a second site, a fallback, a place with supplies and fewer people. An anchor point. Louise tapped the map. We need a route, and we need to know what's on the route. I stared at the lines, roads, contour lines, water. It looked like every fire map I'd ever seen, except the threat markers were now invisible. I can do a recon, I said before I could stop myself. Maya's eyes snapped to me. No, she said immediately. That's too risky. I'm trained for movement in hazard zones, I argued. This is not a fire line, she replied. Louise leaned forward, voice low. If we don't know what's out there, we're blind, he said. And blind gets everyone hurt. Carl looked at us, jaw tight. I can't order you, he said, but I can tell you we need information. We need to know if there's any chance of resupply. We need to know if the north access road is truly blocked. We need to know if there are pockets of survivors. Maya's gaze held mine. If you go, she said, you do it with distance and discipline. No hero moves, no close contact. If you see infected, you back away. If you see people asking for help, you do not touch them. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I realized how many people she had touched in her life to help them. Now touch had become a threat. Louise nodded once, decision made. I'm going, he said. Nate's not going alone. Carl exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. Take a utility truck, he said. Something quiet, not flashy. Bring radios, bring extra fuel, bring water. Maya held up a small kit. Take this, she said. Gloves, face coverings, eye protection, disinfectant. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. I took it and nodded. We'll be careful. Maya's eyes stayed hard. Come back, she said. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. At 4:15 p.m., Louise and I drove out of the yard through the inner gate, then the outer gate, which security opened just enough to let us slip through and then sealed again like it was holding its breath. Outside, the world felt abandoned. The dam's access road wound through dry brush and blackened patches where embers had landed. Smoke hung in layers. The sky was dim, afternoon sun reduced to a dull smear. We drove slow, windows up, scanning. At the first intersection, we saw the evidence of a fight, abandoned cars, doors open, luggage spilled across pavement, no bodies in the open, which was somehow worse. It meant they had moved, or been moved. A mile farther, we saw people. 3 figures walked in the center of the road, not hurrying, not looking around, just walking. Louise slowed. We watched from a distance. They turned their heads toward our vehicle, as if they heard the engine through the thick air. Louise whispered, "Keep going slow. Don't stop." I nodded. We eased around them, giving a wide berth. One drifted toward us, but we were already past. In the rearview mirror, I saw them pivot as one and begin following. Not fast, just persistent. The road dipped into a stretch of trees that were scorched at the base but still standing. Smoke curled around trunks. We reached the highway connector and saw the blockage Carl had mentioned. Not a neat barricade, but a tangle of vehicles abandoned in a way that made the road impassable. Some looked deliberately placed. Others looked like panic crashes. Louise cursed softly. "We're not getting a fuel truck through this," he said. "No," I agreed. We parked at a distance and climbed out, keeping our distance from the cars. The air smelled like hot plastic and smoke. Louise scanned with binoculars he'd grabbed from a security kit. "Movement," he said, pointing. Across the highway, near a strip of trees, figures stood in the shade. They weren't walking. They were waiting. Like they knew people would come here. Like they had learned. That thought chilled me more than anything else had. We retreated to the truck, heart rates high, and drove away without trying to clear the blockage. Clearing it would require time, noise, and close proximity. Those were now luxuries we didn't have. We tried a secondary route toward one of Carl's auxiliary yard sites. The road was narrower, less travelled, bordered by brush that could hide anything. Halfway there, we saw smoke rising from a structure, a small house or cabin, burning, not a wildfire front, but a single structure fire. We slowed, scanning. Near the driveway, a person stood waving both arms. A woman, maybe in her 30s, hair tangled, face streaked with soot. We stopped far enough back that we could retreat quickly. She ran toward us and then stopped abruptly, hands up, as if she remembered something. "Please!" she shouted. "Please! I have my dad! He's hurt!" Luis opened the window only a crack. "Stay where you are!" he shouted back. "Do not come closer!" The woman froze, tears visible even through smoke. "I'm not sick," she cried. "We were hiding. The fire got to the shed, and then people came out of the trees." Her voice broke. I scanned the tree line behind her. Movement. A figure stepping into view, then another. The woman turned her head, saw them, and her face changed from desperation to terror. "They're coming," she whispered, and then she ran toward us again without thinking. Luis's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "Stay back," he shouted. The infected figures accelerated, drawn by her movement and our vehicle. The woman reached the front of our truck and slammed her hands on the hood. "Please!" she screamed. "Please!" Maya's words echoed in my head. "Do not touch them. Do not bring it back." I hated every part of what came next. I shouted through the crack in the window. "Get in the bed of the truck. Do not touch the cab. Do you understand?" The woman hesitated, then scrambled around, climbing into the back bed, staying away from the doors. Luis hit the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, leaving the burning house behind, leaving the infected sprinting after us until they faded into the smoke. The woman crouched in the bed, sobbing. We did not stop until we reached a wider road and had a clear line of sight behind us. Luis pulled over in an open area with no trees close. We got out, staying away from the cab doors, and spoke to the woman from a distance. "What's your name?" I called. "Jenna," she sobbed. "Jenna Marquez." "Jenna," Luis said, voice calmer than I felt. "Were you bitten, scratched, anything like that?" She shook her head frantically. No, my dad. He fell. He hit his head. He's in the house. I couldn't." Her face collapsed again. "I couldn't get him out." The grief in her voice was raw and human. It made everything harder. Luis swallowed. "We can't go back," he said gently. "We can't." Jenna pressed her fists into her eyes. "Then take me with you," she whispered. I looked at Luis. He looked at me. We had just broken the rule that kept us safe. We had brought a stranger into proximity, but we had done it with distance. Now we had to decide whether to complete the mistake or make it worse. "We'll take you to a secure yard," I said finally. "You will be screened. You will follow instructions. If you lie, you endanger everyone." Jenna nodded vigorously, eyes wide. "I won't lie," she said. "I swear." We made her strip off her outer jacket and shoes in the bed of the truck, placing them in a bag we could isolate. We had her wiped down with disinfectant wipes from Maya's kit, focusing on hands and face. It felt cruel. It also felt necessary. Then we drove back toward Shasta Dam, with our eyes on every curve, every ditch, every patch of smoke. Behind us, forests burned. And somewhere in that burning world, people kept walking, who should not have been walking at all. When we returned to the yard just before sunset, security met us at the outer gate with weapons held low and faces tight. Carl appeared behind them, eyes narrowing when he saw Jenna in the truck bed. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. Not angry yet, just stunned. "She was in trouble," Luis said. "She wasn't symptomatic. We kept distance. We need Maya." Maya arrived at a run, took one look at Jenna, and her expression tightened. "Out of the vehicle," she called, voice firm, slowly, hands where I can see them. Jenna obeyed instantly, climbing down and standing in the gravel outside the gate, trembling. Maya screened her right there, asking questions, taking temperature, checking pupils, observing behavior. Jenna answered between sobs. No fever, no confusion, no visible injuries beyond scrapes. Maya's jaw clenched. "You brought risk," she said to me, voice low enough only I could hear. "You brought it to our doorstep." "I know," I said, but leaving her there felt like... "Like what?" Maya snapped, then caught herself breathing hard. "I understand," she said more quietly. "I do. But understanding doesn't change biology." She looked back at Jenna. "You will be held in a quarantine area for 24 hours, she said. "No exceptions. If you show symptoms, you will be isolated. Do you understand?" Jenna nodded, tears streaming. "Yes." Carl exhaled and rubbed his face. "We can use the auxiliary storage shed near the responder pocket," he said. "It's separate." Maya nodded. "Set it up." Security opened the gate only enough to let Jenna pass through the quarantine corridor they created quickly. Carl's people positioned barriers. Maya assigned a volunteer to monitor from a distance. Then Carl pulled Luis and me into the maintenance office, shutting the door. "What did you see out there?" he demanded. Luis told him about the highway blockage and the waiting figures near the trees. Carl's face hardened. "They're learning," he said, voice flat. "I don't know if it's learning," I said, "but it looked like pattern." Carl stared at the map on the wall, eyes calculating. "We can't rely on roads," he said slowly, "and the fire is still moving. This yard won't hold forever if we lose fuel and power." Luis nodded. "We need a fallback," he said. Carl pointed to a location across the lake, reachable by a maintenance access route that ran closer to the waterline. Less brush, fewer ambush points, and crucially, less traffic. "There's a small service yard here," he said. "Fewer fences, but it has a concrete building and a boat launch used for maintenance. If we can get boats running, we might be able to move supplies and people across water instead of roads." Maya entered the office then, closing the door behind her. Her face was tired, but her eyes were sharp. "You're thinking water routes," she said. Carl nodded. "Boats aren't crowded like roads, and infected don't use tools." Maya hesitated. "They can still walk along shorelines," she said. "But water gives us separation." Luis looked at the map. "We can stage a second site," he said. "A smaller, quieter place with less light to draw them." Carl nodded. "Exactly." Maya leaned against the wall, exhaling. "If we do this," she said, "we need strict screening, no exceptions. Every new person is a risk." Her eyes flicked to me, and I understood the message. You already proved how hard that rule is. Outside the office, the yard buzzed with anxious energy, people cooking small meals over controlled burners, children crying, guards walking the fence with flashlights kept low. The dead kept walking, and the living kept planning. Because planning was the only thing keeping us from becoming a story someone else told later. The first boat run happened the next morning at 7:30 a.m. Carl had a maintenance crew with access to a workboat used for inspections. Sturdy, utilitarian, not a pleasure craft. It ran on fuel we could spare if it bought us time. We loaded it with supplies, water containers, food boxes, medical gear, fuel cans. We sent a small team to the auxiliary yard, Carl's best electrician, a security supervisor named Tessa Rowe, and Luis, because Luis had become the kind of leader people followed without asking why. I stayed behind with Maya to manage the main yard. That day, the wildfire's smoke thickened again, and ash fell so heavily that we had to sweep it off surfaces like snow. Visibility dropped. The infected at the fences grew more numerous, drawn by our lights and the scent of people. We learned quickly. Sound discipline mattered. If the yard erupted in shouting, the infected surged. If we kept voices low and lights controlled, they drifted, still present, but less frantic. We learned that the infected moved toward vibration too. Generators, engines, Heavy impacts. Carl began cycling power and reducing unnecessary noise. It made the yard darker, quieter, more tense, but it also reduced pressure on the fences. Maya's quarantine protocols began to show their value. Jenna stayed symptom-free for 24 hours, then 48. She became a helper, moving supplies, cleaning, keeping distance from vulnerable people. She never stopped looking haunted. At 3:10 p.m., Luis radioed back from the auxiliary yard. "Site 2 is viable," he said. His voice was scratchy over the radio but steady. "Concrete building is intact. Perimeter is weaker, but terrain is better. Less crowd. We can control access. We also found 2 more workboats and a small fuel cache." Carl's voice came over the radio from the office beside me. "Copy," he said. "Good work." Maya looked at me. "We will have to move people," she said quietly. I nodded. "Not everyone," I said, thinking of the crowd. Maya's face tightened. "The most vulnerable first," she said. "Kids, elderly, people who can't run." The sentence made my stomach twist, because it implied what happened to those left behind if things went bad. At 6:45 p.m, we heard the first direct breach attempt at the outer gate. Not infected, living people. A group of about 15 appeared out of the smoke, waving, shouting, pleading to be let in. They had backpacks, a stroller, a dog on a leash. Security shouted back through the fence line, ordering them to stay back for screening. One man stepped forward too aggressively, grabbing the fence, shouting that he had children. Behind the group, silhouettes moved in the smoke. The pleading voices shifted into panic. The group turned, saw what was coming, and surged toward the gate. Security backed away, refusing to open it without screening. The group began pounding on the fence, not understanding that opening the gate would also open it for whatever was behind them. I ran to the fence line with Maya beside me, heart hammering. "Back up!" Maya shouted, voice raw. "Back away from the gate!" The man at the fence screamed, "They're coming!" I saw them then. Infected figures drifting out of smoke behind the group, drawn by the noise. The living group was trapped between the fence and the approaching infected. A woman lifted the child from the stroller and clutched him, sobbing. Maya's hands trembled. I could hear her breathing, fast and tight. This was the moment that broke people, the moment where rules felt like cruelty. Carl arrived, eyes blazing. He looked at the scene for 1 second and made a decision that felt like ripping his own heart out. "Open the secondary barrier," he shouted to security. "Not the main gate, the sally port, now!" A sally port is a controlled 2-gate system. One gate opens, you bring people into a small buffer zone, then you close it, then you open the second gate. It's how you prevent a breach from flooding straight into the yard. Security moved fast, opening the outer sally port gate just enough to pull the group inside. They shouted for people to move quickly, to keep distance, to not push. The group surged in, dragging the stroller, dog barking wildly. The infected reached the fence line just as the outer gate slammed shut. Hands grabbed chain link, mouths opened. The group inside the sally port sobbed, shaking, pressed against the inner gate now, begging. Maya stepped forward, raising her voice like a command. "Stop," she said. "Everyone stop moving, hands up, stand still." The group froze, shocked into stillness by her tone. She screened them quickly, eyes scanning for fever, confusion, injuries. The man who had pounded the fence had a scratch on his forearm. Maya's face went hard. "How did you get that?" she demanded. The man stammered. "A branch," he said. "Just a branch. We ran through brush." Maya stared at the scratch like it was a loaded gun. Carl's voice was low, urgent. "Maya," he said, "we can't send them back out there." Maya swallowed hard. "Quarantine," she said. "All of them. No exceptions." Carl nodded, relief and pain mixed. "Do it." We moved them into a quarantine zone. Separate, controlled, monitored. The dog was tied in a corner with food and water. The child cried until he fell asleep in his mother's arms. Outside the fence, the infected remained, pressing and swaying, drawn by our lights. Inside, the living trembled, grateful and terrified. Maya leaned against a wall after it was done, eyes closed for a second. "Every time we do that," she whispered, "we gamble." I stood beside her, listening to the fence rattle under the weight of bodies that did not get tired. "And every time we don't," I said quietly, "we lose something else." Maya opened her eyes and looked at me. "We're going to lose things either way," she said. "The question is whether we lose ourselves." Outside, forests burned. Inside, we kept making choices. And somewhere in the smoke, the dead kept walking. The move to Site 2 began 2 days later, when Carl announced we had fuel for only a limited window if we kept power and gates functioning. We did it in waves, using the workboats to ferry supplies in small groups across the lake to the auxiliary yard. It was not a grand evacuation, it was a quiet, controlled relocation designed to reduce noise and draw as little attention as possible. We moved the most vulnerable first. Children, elderly, people with limited mobility. Maya insisted on screening before boarding and then screening again at arrival. It was exhausting. It was necessary. Jenna volunteered to help with children, keeping them calm, telling them stories that were simple and safe. She had the kind of voice that steadied people. Luis coordinated perimeter setup at Site 2, building barriers from stacked materials, setting up lighting in controlled patterns, creating lanes and choke points that did not look like a prison but functioned like one. Carl stayed in the main yard longer than anyone, overseeing the transfer of equipment and fuel. It was his facility, his responsibility, and he carried it like a weight. The infected continued to press the main yard fences at night. Sometimes they drifted away in the day. Sometimes new ones arrived, as if drawn by invisible currents. The wildfire's smoke ebbed and surged, depending on wind. Some mornings the sky was almost blue, and the world looked normal enough to make you sick. Some afternoons, the sun disappeared again. On the last night before we planned to abandon the main yard, the fences failed in a different way. Not from pressure, from fire. A gust carried a cluster of embers into a stack of dry debris near the outer perimeter. The debris ignited quietly, small flame growing. A guard saw it and shouted. Someone ran with an extinguisher. The flame died. Then, another spot flared on the opposite side. Then, another. It was like the yard was being tested. We extinguished what we could, but the wind was increasing and smoke thickened. Carl stood in the center of the yard, radio in hand, face grim. "We leave at first light," he said, voice hard. "No more waiting." Maya nodded, exhausted. Luis nodded too. At 5:20 a.m., a scream rose from the quarantine area. My heart lurched. I sprinted toward it, Maya already running ahead of me. Inside the quarantine zone, one of the newly arrived men, the one with the scratch, was on the ground, convulsing, eyes wide. 2 others backed away, screaming. Maya stopped short, hands up, voice sharp. "Back away," she ordered. "Everyone back away." The man on the ground stopped convulsing. He went still. Then he moved. He rose to his feet with a jerky motion and turned toward the nearest person. Maya's face went pale. The people in quarantine screamed and pressed against the barrier tape, trying to escape. The man lunged. Security moved in with long poles, pushing him back, keeping distance. He slammed against the tape and kept coming. Maya's voice became iron. "Seal this zone," she shouted. "Now, keep them contained." People sobbed. A woman screamed that her husband was in there. A child cried. Maya's eyes were wet, but her hands stayed steady. We sealed the quarantine zone, like we had sealed the isolation building days earlier, with barriers, distance, and the knowledge that containment was now mercy for everyone else. Carl arrived and saw it, and closed his eyes like he was physically struck. "We're leaving," he said hoarsely. "We're leaving now." The last boat run began at 6:10 a.m. We loaded supplies fast. We moved people fast. We kept voices low. We kept lights controlled. The infected pressed the fences, drawn by movement, but the yard's noise remained subdued enough that they did not surge into a frenzy. At 7:05 a.m., I stood on the boat's deck beside Maya as we pulled away from the main yard. Carl stood on the dock alone, holding a radio in one hand and a hard hat in the other. He looked like a man watching his life's work become a memory. Luis called from the boat, "Carl, move!" Carl hesitated, looking back toward the yard one last time. Then he stepped onto the boat and we pushed off. As we crossed the lake, I watched the main yard recede, lights dim, fences shimmering with movement, smoke curling above it. It had been our refuge. Now it was a beacon for things that did not die the way they should. Behind us, forests burned. Ahead, Site 2 waited, smaller, quieter, less secure in some ways, but farther from the roads and crowds that had become feeders for infection. The boat's engine hummed, steady. Water slapped against the hull. For a moment, the world felt almost peaceful. Then, from the shoreline, near the abandoned yard, I saw figures stepping down the slope toward the water, heads tilted, tracking us. They didn't jump in. They didn't swim. They just watched. I felt a chill. "They're following," Jenna whispered beside me, holding a child's hand. "They're going to follow." Maya stared at the shoreline, jaw clenched. "Then we keep moving," she said. "We stay quiet. We stay controlled." Luis looked out over the water, eyes hard. "We build again," he said, "like we always do." Carl sat heavily on a bench, face in his hands for a second, then straightened as if he remembered he had people depending on him. I looked at the smoky horizon, where the wildfire still glowed. For years, I'd fought fire with crews and maps and tools. I'd learned how to cut line, how to read wind, how to keep people alive in the most unforgiving conditions. Now I was learning a different lesson. Fire burns what it can reach. Fear burns what you let it reach. And the infected, whatever they were, kept walking as long as there was something to draw them forward. As we approached the quieter auxiliary yard, I realized something that made my throat tighten. The wildfire season would end eventually. Rain would come. Fuel would run out. Forests would recover. But the other disaster didn't need dry brush or wind. It needed us. Noise, crowds, panic, contact. We were the fuel. And if we wanted any chance at surviving, we had to become something fire crews understood better than anyone else. A disciplined team, moving with intention, building barriers, controlling risk, and never letting one mistake become a chain reaction. Site 2 came into view. A small concrete building, a boat launch, fences that were thinner but placed in terrain that gave us sightlines. Luis stood and nodded once, already seeing where the weak points were. Carl gripped his clipboard like it was a lifeline. Maya checked the people around her, eyes scanning for any sign of fever or confusion, because now she knew how fast it could change. Jenna held the child's hand tighter and stared at the shore as if daring the world to try again. And I, Nate Callahan, wildland firefighter, stepped off the boat into a new kind of incident, where the forest burned behind us and the dead kept walking ahead of us, and the only thing between collapse and survival was what we built with our own hands. Not walls alone, not fences alone, but rules, discipline, and the stubborn refusal to let fear be the incident commander. Because if fear took command, we were already lost, and the smoke-filled world would keep walking right over us. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.